It has existed for millions of years. It was here long before humans, and long before any life lived. It is a realm hidden from a sight of human eyes, yet it sits right next to our world. It is a magical place filled with fairies, elves, spirits, gnomes and more. Yet many of us will go through life never experiencing it because this realm is not ours. Only true believers who open themselves to these magical beings will be able to receive their wisdom, guidance and direction. Even if a human could hear the name of this realm spoken to them, the human tongue is incapable of pronouncing it. So we shall simply call it Fae. Fae is a place where myth, legend, fairy tales and magic collide into a realm filled with adventure, joy, blessings and danger. In a series of Witches episode 5 Washington, I will take you on a journey that will take us into the world of elves and fairies. Yet this is no fairy tale or myth. What I'm about to explain is a map that will help you navigate the world of the fairies and, if you so choose, extend your visit for all eternity. Yet before we begin, let me share a truth found in this world. Legend states that through every lifetime there must be a bridge from this world to the other world. The bridge must be human and possess magical abilities. When the fairies bestow this great honour to a human, this person is named the Fairy Queen. At Pure Journey Productions, we decided to seek out this Fairy Queen. We heard rumours that fairy magic was highly active in the state of Washington. We consulted a witch who lives in Oregon, who helped us narrow down our search. Our efforts paid off. After a bit of conversation and planning, we met with her. We asked her many questions about herself and how she became the Queen of the Fairies. Further, she surprised us by doing an on-camera communication with the fairies. The fairies have a message for us. I won't spoil it here. Continue to watch it to experience it for yourself. Right after our visit with the Fairy Queen, we met a witch with so much light energy that it was hard not to feel amazing just talking to her. She now helps others find their true path in life, beat depression, anxiety, and addictions. But that is not how she started her life. She went through tremendous trauma before she found her power and her magic. Through magic, she too speaks to fairies. When you bring fairy and elf energy into your life, you obtain endless possibilities, open doorways that were once closed to you, and guidance that can sometimes be confusing but eventually becomes clear. One thing is sure, the more fairy energy you allow into your life, the more magic there will be. If you seek these beings, then you need to look near lakes and trees in the forest. They are nature beings and heavily tied to it. Don't be surprised if you see elves and fairies from a distance, but as you near they morph into an insect, animal or even a human as you approach. They possess supernatural powers, allowing them to move through space and shapeshift at will. Elves, fairies, gnomes, spirits, and all the other spirits were here long before they were humans. And they will be here well after humans are gone. In the realm of Fae, time stops. Those that live in Fae do not experience time like us. They can live for thousands of years, and after that, live 1,000 years more. The only way their life can end is through forced death. These beings are not immune to wounds during battle or surprise attacks. Sadly, harm can come to them. If you wish to work or talk to fairies, I recommend talking to someone who knows about them. Why, you ask? Because not all fairies are good. Some are evil and enjoy causing havoc and chaos in your life. The realm of Fae can be dangerous if you don't have a guide. Most interactions with fairies are by accident, which is not always the best experience. Take for example, the story of a couple who attended a party in their town. After having a great time, they left the party late at night and began to walk back home. The path to their home took them through a forest. The path was dirt but broad enough so that there was ample room on each side of them, plus a long patch of grass and weeds stretched out on each side of the path between the forest and themselves. As they continued their short journey home, they started to hear noises in the forest to the right of them. They picked up their pace and realised that Whatever was in the dark forest kept pace with them. When they stopped, the noises in the forest ceased, and when they continued walking, the noises started up again. The noises were scaring them, as they did not know if an animal was tracking them or a person. They noticed that the dirt road started to glow green, with little sparkles gliding just above the dirt. They also saw this same phenomenon in the forest. They helped each other stay calm and remain on the path, yet their fear quickly changed to an overwhelming feeling of wanting to go into the forest. It was a feeling of comfort and warmth that beckoned from the path into the glowing green forest. They both mentioned that they would have left the path if they were alone and not together and entered the forest. It was the couple's strength of togetherness that guided them home. Once they arrived at their front door, they turned around and watched as the glow slowly disappeared from the path and the forest. They stated later that they believed what happened to them involved fairies and the fairy realm. That is just one of the thousands of stories and true life experiences over the centuries involving fairies and elves. Working with fairies. Be warned that nature spirits are all around you. Know they repay kindness with kindness and bad behaviour with bad behaviour. Unlike witchcraft, fairy and elf magic is very strong and unforgiving. You get what you give tenfold. There are two ways to reach fairies and elves. Fairies and elves will come regardless and arrive when they are needed the most. The other way is to find a portal and communicate with them. If you want to connect to the fairy world, you need to find a portal. The best times to find a portal is on the eves of Beltane, Midsummer, and Halloween. Your magic will be most potent during a full moon, when the opportunity to speak with these magical creatures is most potent. And if you wish, you can walk between the mortal world and the other world. Everyone sees fairies at one time or another. The flash of light in the corner of your eye, the sense someone is behind you, and when you turn there is no one there. Or you walk into a room and feel as though someone is there. When you wake in the morning or during the night and almost see something out the corner of your eye. Or when you have a strange sensation, sometimes accompanied by a tingling up and down the spine, you can be confident you have touched upon the fairy realm. Want to attract a fairy or elf? To attract elves and fairies, you have to be into gardening. They love flowers, plants and trees. They also love water features and fish ponds. When they are around, you will notice you will feel a sense of well-being and happiness. These beings can help you to achieve your personal and professional goals, maintain your health, attract abundance, awaken yourself spiritually, and have a greater understanding of all there is in your current life and past lives. Follow tradition and give your first and last piece of fruit to the elves and fairies as a gift. Treat them wrong, and you can be sure of chaos in your life. Refer to them as the good folk or the gentry. If you want to talk to them, they will initiate contact. They love music, celebrations, dancing, gifts, and especially gifts of fresh food and drink. The more flowers you have planted in your garden, the more likely you will attract butterflies, hummingbirds, and dragonflies. This will be a magnet for elves and fairies. The world of Fae is always here and ready to accept you if you choose to accept it. Now it is time to meet our first modern day witch. She is an ordained minister, Reiki master, teacher, Theta healing practitioner, intuitive, fairy communicator, mother, wife, and badass fairy queen. And she has a lot to say on the fairy subject. Welcome, Elizabeth Sines.
I lived all over California. I was born in San Joaquin Valley in Central California. And then I moved up to like Santa Cruz area for a couple of years. My parents got divorced and I moved with my mom up there. And then we moved down to Southern California from the time I was 12 and I lived there till I was 21. I've been talking to them my whole life. I can't tell you when it started because they've always been there. My mom was actually a practicing psychic when I was a child. She already had gotten into this. She had when she was in college, she had a spiritual experience with Guru Muktananda and had a spiritual awakening. And so she was already going down that path. And So when I was born and I was talking to these beings, she was just kind of went, okay, and acknowledged it and let it go. And we lived very rural. We were out like by the foothills in Central California, which like there was literally not another house for miles from the house I was born in. And we actually moved when I was 7, and I thought we had like moved to town because on the second story, if you looked out, you could see 2 other houses. And I thought we had like really moved into the city or something at that point because I'd been so isolated. But you know, there was a benefit to that because I didn't have as much outside like telling me that what I was experiencing, I wasn't experiencing. My dad was pretty much an agnostic, but he was very connected to nature. He would take us to Yosemite every year. So he had this real connection to nature being spirituality. He wouldn't call himself a witch, but he would call himself an agnostic that believes in nature as the divine, which to me is still kind of a witch, but you know, that was his experience. And then my mom was definitely, I mean, identified as a witch, was into that. She did a lot of, she veered more to like Hindu-esque type things because of her experience with Guru Muktananda. So there was a lot of that in my house. I wasn't raised Christian. Both of my sets of grandparents are Christian, and I would go to church occasionally with them. I learned that there were certain people I could talk about what I was experiencing with, and certain people that I couldn't. I kind of learned that very, very early on. And I definitely had times that I was more connected and flowing with it, and then times that I was like trying to kind of shut it down. When I was a teenager, there were definitely times I didn't want to like fully embrace it. But I definitely have been, obviously for the last 15 years I've been doing it professionally. So I definitely found my stride in it. And so yeah, that was a very long answer. For my whole life, they've been around, and I can't tell you when it started. They've just always been there. It would be more like, I don't know, just kind of like playful interactions would really be what it is. They would just kind of show up. It wasn't necessarily that I wouldn't say I was like working with them the way I do now. It would be more like they were just around, and I'd be like, oh, hey, how you doing? And they would kind of like talk back, and they'd be doing things in nature. I think they were kind of doing their own work or their own thing, and I just happened to be seeing them kind of like a kid wandering up on, you know, someone gardening or something. Like it wasn't necessarily that they were even there for me, though there were times that they did kind of show up in that way. There were issues in my family, issues in my house, and they would come and there would be comfort from them for me from that. So it actually took me a very long time to get to the point of like realizing that they were guides that could really work with me on my spiritual path. I always kind of had them as just beings that were there that would show up. Well, I kept trying to shut it down and not see them. That actually was the bigger piece. The conversations, they actually weren't really happening. When I was 16, I had a very intense car accident that I was in, and I actually saw myself in the hospital after this car accident before it happened, and it kind of freaked me out. It wanted me to kind of shut down on my premonition type ideas, because like I knew it was coming and I still couldn't stop it, kind of thing. But then I also had a whole kind of out-of-body experience in that car accident. And they basically came to me and said, like, you have this work to do and you need to start embracing it now. And I was like, no, I'm not. And I totally ran from it. That's often my way. Like I had like these really like people would have like profound experiences, magical experiences, like, oh, and what do you do? I'm like, yeah, I told them no and ran away from it, because I do that a lot. I don't like being told to do stuff. No. But yeah, I actually, and I went into drinking and blew up relationships and had like a really bad 3 or 4 year run, and then got sober, healed a lot of my relationships, and got into my work. And it was actually shortly after that my mom, who's also living in Southern California at the time, I'd already married, had a kid at this point, she's like, I'm getting a call that I need to move, and we need to get out of Southern California. It's time. And she actually was born up in the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest up here. And my aunt was living up here on Whidbey Island, and my mom was talking to her and said, you know, these are like, I want to be still near the ocean, but I want trees, I want this and this. And my aunt goes, that sounds a lot like Whidbey Island. And so my mom's like, I think we're gonna move to Whidbey Island. And I said, yeah, go have a good time. I'm not leaving California. Like, I love the California beaches and Disneyland. I'm not going. And so she and a bunch of other members of my family came up to Whidbey Island, and they took video, and I stayed back and ran the family business. We had a bagel shop in Delhi. And when they came back, there was this video of Whidbey Island that I watched. So they were just showing me their trip, and I'm like, yeah, it looks cool. And they got to this point on the island, and this wave of energy just like came out of the TV and hit me, and I was like, crap, I'm moving to Whidbey Island. Just like there was no night. And my husband at the time actually was like wanting to do that, so he he's now my ex-husband, but at the time he was my husband. He was working for Universal, which also was owned by Panasonic, and got a job through Panasonic. And like within, I think it was like 4 weeks, I'd be going, I think we're moving to Whidbey Island. I was in a truck moving to Whidbey Island, having never set foot here, having never come to Washington State, and I've never regretted it. It's been pretty amazing. There's definitely a lot of fairy energy here. And when I came here, I was getting the message I was coming here to do my fairy work. And again, I tried to deny that for about, I don't know, 6 months to a year. And then I got connected up with a Reiki teacher and started doing Reiki, and it just all kind of snowballed. And that's been, 18 years now of living, 19 years now I was living here, so. I've learned that I actually spend more energy trying to tune things out than actually tune in. So a lot of it's just about letting down my guard. Sometimes it's just like being in a meditative state, and more often than not, I kind of go into a meditative state and just talk to them in my mind. And I get visual, I get audio sometimes, I get feeling. My main connection, I think people kind of have like one sense that's strongest for them often when they're dealing with kind of psychic information. And for me, I'm an empath, I'm a feeler first. So I kind of get the feeling, and then my brain works out some of those pieces. But I also often will get visuals and audio and stuff now too, just because I've done it for so long. They have physically appeared in front of me. I've had those experiences. I sometimes can just hear their voice, and I don't have to be the meditative state. They'll be talking to me. Sometimes they use my world to pay attention. One of my favorite stories to tell is, like, this is a prime example. I was having a day where I was just really stressed out and like trying to make a bunch of things happen. And my son had this button, like a pin, and it was Navi from the Legend of Zelda games, which is the little fairy. And Navi's thing is, hey, listen. And so I was walking around, and also I felt something stuck on the bottom of my foot. It wasn't like pin stuck in it. It was just like sweaty stuck on. And I pick up, and it's that button stuck on the bottom of my foot going, hey, listen. I was like, okay. So I stopped and tuned in, and of course they had stuff to tell me. And it was, so like sometimes it's like that. They're like trying to get my attention. They'll do something. I'll be like, oh, okay, they're trying to get my attention. I gotta pay attention now. And I think that's really important for people to remember. Sometimes with guides, they kind of get in this thing of like, what are they doing for me? It's like, yeah, but it's a guide. You're working with them. It's a relationship. We have to have respect, and we have to remember to also be listening all the time and getting that information in. And usually it's still for me that they're giving me the information, but it's still a part of that conversation. I do readings for people, and I will get the fairies that are working with them that will show up. I do my own path, my own work. They show up and talk about that. Sometimes I get very strong with just like, I gotta sit down. And so one of the other ways I get information is I do channel them, sometimes verbally. More often I just get into a channeling state and write. And so I often will get this message of like, there's this bigger message that has to get out to the world. And that's what I use my blog for a lot, to be like, okay, this is coming up. This is the information coming up. This is the energy that we're about to deal with. And then it's also my own personal stuff. They'll come and help me with, or I'll be feeling stuck or having a hard time. I tune in and get information from them. And they also, there's kind of this larger mission of them wanting to work more with humans again. Like, we used to be more connected to them. Then we had to go more science, and that was part of our evolution. They've had their own evolution, and it's time for us to come and be working together in partnership again. So that's been a lot of my mission with like my business side of getting the information out. So I'd say that's a big chunk of the work I do with them, is just kind of helping other people connect with them, giving the information about them, helping people broaden their ideas. People have such a limited idea about what, like, they think fairy, they think Tinkerbell, and fairies are in every culture around the entire world. You have like the Jinns in the Middle East, you have the Native Americans had fairies that worked with, you have the Menehune in Hawaii, you have, you go on, every continent, every culture has some form of fairy. And if you can get tuned in with either your own bloodline and the fairies they work with, or where you're currently living and the fairies they work with, it's easier to get that connection. And so it's kind of like for me to start broadening people's ideas about what fairies are, to help them connect to that magic again. I mean, we get so, and I love science, don't get me wrong, I'm not bad at science at all, but we get so scientific minded and proof minded that we forget to like embrace that divine magic that is in our world and in ourselves. And that's kind of like the overall energy of what they're bringing all the time for us, is to help us connect with that and work with them. Oh, the whole gambit. I mean, there's so many. I kind of feel like when you talk about fairies, it's just like saying like, what does a human look like? I mean, there's such a gambit, and even more so. I mean, I've had like little small pixies. I've had full size humanoid ones that look like insects, ones that look like flowers, trolls, mermaids, selkies. I mean, there's so many different kind of varieties. I even had one that like helped push me even further on this. One time I was doing this reading and this fairy showed up, and I said, you look like what I would like think like a sci-fi alien looks like. Like, you're not even thinking fairy. And the fairy said to me, you think we only work with your planet? Open your idea about what a fairy looks like. Because I mean, I've had them just look like a regular animal. I mean, I don't think I can even tell you all the different ways that they've appeared to me, but they're not always small. They can be very big. They can be very nature-like. They can be very human-like. It just kind of depends on the fairy and the energy they work with. I find that they basically are embodying a certain type of energy, and where that fits in nature and the world, it kind of gives them their appearance. And I think there's also an aspect of them appearing in a way that we can kind of comprehend too. I'm not sure that necessarily like their form, how they see each other, but it does seem that like if it was a fairy that's dealing with release and letting go, it might be really connected to like the fall leaves, and it might show up more like leaf-like in that way. To give you an example. So they said I needed to start claiming my space as a fairy queen in this realm, because a fairy queen is not someone who like rules over people necessarily. Queen is really about being of service. And I mean, if you get down to like the real, what government or royalty is supposed to be, is about being of service of the people. And so they said, I am a representative of the fairy realm in the earth realm. I am a fairy queen, and to claim it, honor it. So I still have trouble claiming I have. Sure. So Reiki is a Japanese healing technique that came forward and got actually bigger in the US than in Japan, just because of politics and other craziness there, and how it moved. But it's about focusing energy on the different chakra points in the body. I see that always more as a real physical healing energy rather than kind of the more emotional, mental stuff of like the fairy readings or the theta healing can be. And I took training all the way to master teacher, so I can tune other people. I've taught classes before. It's definitely, when I took Reiki, it's something I've always was working with. I've always kind of worked with people's physical energy. It was something I can see and would experience, and since very young. And when I took my first Reiki class, I kind of felt like, oh, this is what I've been doing. Now I have a name and a framework for it. And so I really wanted to go deep on that. And I did study for a few years. And it's been a very profound, I've experienced some really miraculous healings with people. I've had people had broken bones, cured headaches. And I think it's one of those things too, it isn't like a necessarily going to always work for everybody kind of thing. There's lots of different layers for healing, but it gives the space that if you are open to having miraculous healing, you can. So it's been profound. My mother's disabled, and the last 6 years I've had this whole journey with her. And at one point, she had a stroke and fell and hit her head, and they had to do brain surgery, and she was in a drug-induced coma. And they were kind of like, we don't know that she's going to even be able to like talk or move her arms or anything if she comes out of this. And I was like, no, not accepting that. This is not how we do things. And so, and I mean, I have a high regard for the medical community. Again, I'm not one of those people that you just heal and negate, like you can use both. But I sat in her hospital room all night, just running Reiki, pulling beliefs, called in other light workers or something. The next day, she woke up. Within 24 hours, she had full use of her arms and legs. I mean, even doctors are like, you're a miracle. We don't know how this happened. So I've had some profound experiences with that, where I think when we can channel the energy, it's amazing. And it's all about just being connected to that divine light. Theta healing was brought forth by Anna Steibel, and is a whole technique about getting the theta brainwave state. That's why it's called theta healing, connecting to source and pulling negative beliefs and having them replaced by source with positive beliefs. And you can also command healings, and there are other things you can do in that. That actually was, my mom originally was very called in doing that, and I got trained under her. I use Reiki and Theta because they're the two things that I personally had the most profound experiences with, and they work the best for me. So I figure share them with other people and keep using them on myself. But yeah, Theta, it's like the idea of affirmation, which I had done since I was 12, but it's instantaneous, and it has some amazing things where you're shifting. The idea too is like, people think it's like, oh, you're changing your reality, which you can, but also sometimes it's just shifting your own perception and your reactions, and it shifts everybody else around you. So they're pretty profound. And I use both of those energies in some of my like kind of own, like the guys have like kind of led me to like learn my own things. And so I do a lot of going into people's past lives, clearing karmic cycles that they're like stuck in, finding the things that are still holding them in those and kind of clearing them, and accessing Akashic records and things like that. So I find that they're great tools to kind of even take further with other techniques. Saying the message for the people watching this is that magic is your answer, that you need to connect to your own personal magic and look for the magic in your life. I mean, it can be things as like a seed spreading into a plant is a miracle, and that's magical, but then also opening to the things that are on your peripheral. When you see something on your peripheral and you don't know what it is, when you feel like you've had an experience but you can't define it, stop trying to figure it out. Just accept something magical is happening, and the more that you do that, you're retraining your brain to open to the magic. That they also want people to know they are here to work with them. Again, letting go of ideas about who they are, what they are, facing fears about. There's a lot of, little side note, there's a lot of stuff out there about fairies are dangerous and they're tricksters and they're going to, steal your baby. They did. I don't know. I've heard all of them. And you have to remember that one, the Christian and Catholic Church came through and demonized a lot of those beings, a lot of the different types of divine beings that weren't of earth realm, and to make people afraid of them so they would turn to Christian beings who aren't of the earth realm. I'm not quite sure how that's different. And then also that it's almost like a game of telephone, that there's a lot of these stories are being told verbally and then interpreted by the people who are hearing it, and then they're telling their interpretation, and so on and so forth. So the way that this story was originally told is not necessarily being interpreted and told out. It was back then now. And so what's seen as trickery, as trying to do harm, could be trickery, but more in the sense of getting you to see a new perspective, trying to help you just kind of get out of your own way. And that, I think, got interpreted as like malice intent often. So I kind of bring that up because I know I've run into that a lot with people and talk about working with fairies and how, it's dangerous to work with them, or they have some ill intent. I'm not saying that every fairy wants to work with humans and has like this bright side disposition to do so. I'm just saying if you open up and call to them, the ones that will come to you are not going to have ill intent. And there's also the fairies themselves, I think, had a time that they didn't know how to communicate with humans, and there's that thing about being very riddle-like, and I still run into that with them. But they are like have learned now how to communicate clearer with humans than they used to. So I think there's less miscommunication that happens in that. That was kind of a side to their message because I felt like it needed to be said. Okay, let me get the rest of their message. What's needed now too is that we have to remember the importance of play. And that's actually a common message with them. One of my favorite messages they brought forth one time is never underestimate the importance of bubble blowing. And it's like that we get in this thing where we get like so, especially in times when there's trauma, especially when there's so much going on in the world, we can get so like serious. And there is an important piece of being childlike, of being in that play, of being in the moments of just joy, doing things just for the sake of joy, not because it's gonna, produce anything or be anything. And the more you can get into those places, that's where we open up to our own personal magic. That's when ideas fall through, come through, and we get more in that flow. So that's like right now, that's what's needed the most on our planet. Thefairywoman.com. It's pretty simple. One big long THE, fairy spelled FAIRY. I know some people like to spell the other spelling. I do FAIRY, woman.com.
You just met Elizabeth Science. You can find out more about her at our website at thefairywoman.com. Now it's time to meet our second modern day witch. She's doing some amazing work helping others find their power, magic, and place in life. Amber is an intuitive life coach and mentor who works with women who are struggling with their sensitivity. Welcome, Amber Rochelle.
My name is Amber Rochelle, and I live in Seattle, Washington, my husband and my 2 cats. I honestly can't remember anything different, as long as I can remember. I just had such intense emotions, and I was just a little sponge for everybody else's emotions. And I always felt like I was different. I was weird. I didn't, just like you said, I didn't fit in. I didn't belong. Even at a very, very young age, I felt that way. And I think that was a little exacerbated by the fact that being super emotional was not really didn't really fit in with the vibe of how I grew up with the rest of the people around me. So it was kind of a lot of, unspoken messages that I needed to tone that down. it really wasn't until I actually started doing a lot of like inner healing and transformational growth work, because up until that point, and that started when I was like around 26, up until that point, I still, I had read a little bit about it. At that point, I understood what a highly sensitive person was. I understood what an empath was, but I hated it. I thought it was a curse. And, a lot of people still do. And I was constantly trying still to push it down and to not, I didn't want to alienate my friends by being too emotional. And, the more I pushed it down, the more it pushed back. Right. And so I was depressed and anxious, and, that amongst a myriad of other reasons led to me really struggling with an eating disorder in my 20s bleeding into my early 30s. And so when I started seeking real treatment for that, part of the work was coming back, as I call it, coming back home to myself and really figuring out all those parts of myself that I had rejected, and not just how to kind of like bring those back, but how to embrace them. And so through trying to learn how to love myself and accept myself, like my sensitivity was a huge part of that. And that's when I really started reading and seeking and looking for information and different modalities of how I could, love my sensitivity, but also be able to exist in, a not so sensitive world and how I could manage, taking on the emotions of others. And it's been a profound journey. And it was through that, I was led into a bunch of other spiritual work. Yeah, I think a lot of, like you said, like a lot of loners or people that feel like maybe like misfits or misunderstood, like weirdos, like I was always the weird kid, which now I love. But I think, particularly to the younger crowd, like people are going to say and think whatever they're going to say and think about you. And you don't have any control over that. All you have control over is what you do with that information and how you talk to yourself. And I think that magic and witchcraft it's a really beautiful way to actually start learning more about yourself and connecting more to yourself. And in terms specifically, if somebody is sensitive and empathetic, like that's actually, well, in my opinion, that's actually like a magical gift. And so it can help you take these things that society at large might label as strange or weird or off, and start to utilize them in a way that makes your life better, that can make other people's lives better. And I just think, keep an open mind, do your research. I've always been a solitary practitioner. I was never one way or another fully, I've never been in a coven. Like I studied Wicca, but, I've kind of come to a practice of my own understanding. And whichever way you go, it is fine. But, there's so many different facets of witchcraft, and just let yourself kind of experience everything that's out there. And I think just trust your gut and don't care about what other people think, because if I could go back in my life and change anything, I would change that. Because at the end of the day, being yourself and following your heart and the things that you're drawn to is what's going to make you the most happy. So I would just say to, let yourself explore and, do your thing. It's interesting because I wouldn't have said this then, but looking back, probably when I was around like 8, 9, 10, I was very connected to, I still am very connected to nature, but I was out in nature a lot as a kid. And, I remember thinking, I thought it was my imagination at the time, but I remember thinking that like I could hear the trees. And I, for some reason, found 4-leaf clovers wherever I went. Like I still have a book pressed of all of them, little things like that. And I was always really into fairies. And as a little girl, it's like, oh, fairies and fairy tales. But to this day, I'm still very connected to fairy energy and fairy work. So I, looking back, I feel like I was, without knowing it, communing with nature in a way. And then when I was, 13, 14 is when I started picking up some books about Wicca. And similar to you, I was raised strictly Catholic. And so my mom was freaking out. Oh, you're worshiping the devil. And I was like, no, Mom, I'm not worshiping the devil. That's not what this is at all. So that she kind of turned me off to it for a little while. But when I was in high school, I read the book, The Mists of Avalon. And for me, that, like, I've always been very connected to the Celtic culture and lore around the priestesses and the goddesses and all that type of stuff. And that really kind of cracked me open. And from that point, there wasn't really any looking back for me. I wasn't very public about it. It was very much, I would never have told anybody that I thought I was a witch back then. Now I'm like, proud witch. And it evolved, as I went through my life. And there's people that identify as like certain kinds of witches, a kitchen witch or a hedge witch or all different things. And I always just kind of thought, I don't know, I don't know that I need a label for it. But these days I'm like, I totally just feel like I'm a feelings witch. I mean, that's the depth and the emotions. Like, I'm a Scorpio, like that's the area that I love to swim in. And so that's what I always say now is that, my work with my clients is about feelings, and everything I talk about is about embracing your emotions. So yeah, I am a feelings witch. It's really just something that's always kind of like present in my mind. I wouldn't say that I have historically, I mean, never say never, directly communicated with the fairies, but that energy around the whole fairy realm, and like I said, I'm very connected to nature, has always been really strong for me. I don't know if Kristen mentioned this to you when you guys had your interview, but there is a giant festival in Oregon every summer called Fairy Worlds, and I've been going for 16, 17 years now. And the energy of that crowd and that particular festival is just, it's this very like free, playful, like zero judgment, just kindness, like everybody is being themselves. And that was what I was always so attracted to. Like, it's all of us like misfit kids getting together and just like having a blast, and everybody's praising each other's costumes, and it's just like, it's that like playful, childlike, kind of delightful energy that I've always been really drawn to. For me, that would be intuition. Just really, I think my biggest strengths are being clairsentient and claircognizant. So it's, obviously being an empath, I feel, I can now sort of turn that on and off. So it's helpful in my work with my clients to be able to feel what's going on with them. But I've also always had a really strong inner knowing. I was disconnected from that for a very long time, but coming back to that and really making it a priority to continually practice shutting out the noise of the rest of the world and connecting to my own gut and my inner knowing has been such a powerful guide throughout my life. And the changes that I've seen, my own healing and, my outer reality that's changed since I started doing that have been really spectacular. And so I believe super strongly in the power of intuition and, of listening to yourself and to something greater than yourself. I think I'm a fighter. Like, I'm not like, it's funny because I'm so sensitive, and I'm very girly and I'm very like, but I am a freaking fighter. And and I think there's this misconception out there that you can't be sensitive and strong, or that, being sensitive means that you're weak. And it's total bullshit. Like, that's just putting people in a box. Like, I think it takes great strength to be sensitive in this world. And you have to overcome sort of like an extra layer of stuff. And so, I think that if I could leave any legacy really behind me is to like, don't give up on yourself and don't be afraid of being different. Don't be afraid of like, embrace all of who you are, because there's a gift in everything, whether or not like society is going to recognize that. And, I think that's one of the messages that I find that is really important, is that people's authentic truth is the most magical thing ever. So, just keep fighting and be who you are. And, I love to be an example for that. I think that one of the coolest things that I can share with anybody who's listening is, sort of a loose example of my own practice and how I connect to my intuition on a daily basis, and especially as a sensitive person. One tip that I always give to people, especially when they're starting out, is what I call taking your emotional pulse. And I actually got a tattoo on my wrist when I was way younger to remind myself to do this. So I like to think of it like this. If you are an empath, and most people have a level of sensitivity, whether you're an empath or not, we live in such a noisy world, right? Like we have the media, and there's just, the physical noise and all the visual stuff that's coming at us. And so I think we have these little like antennae, right? And they're like out here, like taking all of this stuff in. And it is a muscle to learn how to tune those antennae back into your own frequency. And it can be challenging to do that at first, because a lot of times when people first start doing that, they're like, well, I don't hear anything. I don't know what I'm supposed to be listening for. And it's like, well, you just haven't gotten the dial quite yet there. You're on the fuzz, you're getting the fuzz right now. But one way that I really like to tap in, I try to do it on a daily basis. I'm not perfect. it's not always easy, but it's to really just like slowing down is so freaking important. Slowing down and like being by yourself and sitting. I do a practice called morning pages. I did not come up with this. It's from a book called The Artist's Way. But basically it's when you first wake up in the morning, grab your notebook or journal or whatever and write 3 pages. And if you don't know what to say, you can just be like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say, until stuff starts to come out. And that's a really powerful way in the morning to like tap into, because when we're falling asleep or right when we're waking up is when the veil between our subconscious is the thinnest. And so you can kind of start to tap into what's going on underneath the surface. It also serves as a way to kind of get all of that, talk in your head out on the page. And then what I like to do is just check in with myself. And I always close my eyes, because just shutting out visual stimuli, and this is the emotional pulse type thing, is to like check in with yourself, put your hand on your heart, if that makes you feel better, and breathing, really connecting to your breath. And if you can't really hear what your heart or your soul is saying, check in with your body. Like if your shoulders are up here, be like, what, like, you can even ask your body, like, what am I holding here? And that can help give you like a doorway also into what your heart and your soul are trying to say to you. And then I will usually pray and then meditate after that. So it's all these different avenues to kind of access, that voice inside of you. And when you do that on a regular basis, and I make a whole ritual out of it, because that just amplifies everything. So I have a certain essential oil that I use only for that practice, so that my brain associates that smell now with that practice. I have a certain candle, I have divination tools, and it's a whole thing. But, and to each their own, however you want to handle it. But I think the most important thing is having that daily time where you really prioritize, like asking yourself, what's going on in here? And over time, you get to know that voice and that feeling. And then when you're out in the world, it's easier for you to tap into your own inner knowing, despite the noise. So that's kind of my most simple, powerful practice to start to connect to your own inner magic. And it really can work wonders when you do it on a consistent basis. Yeah, so, it's funny, my background is in advertising. I was in corporate for a long time until about 6 or 7 years ago, and I burn out. And I always wanted to do something that helped people. And I just I went with corporate because it was what you were supposed to do. And I was following the go to high school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, get the whole thing. And then, I was like, I just can't do this anymore. And I know that there's so much more inside of me and that I can share with other people. And so I sought out life coaching. And when I found it, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I love this. It was like something clicked and I just had to do it. And so as I was getting into it, most of the clients that came to me were highly sensitive and empaths because, like attracts like. And once I started working with them and seeing how much of my experience was reflected in their experience and how many commonalities there were between the struggles that we had had, I was like, this is really important and people need this. And that's when I said, no, I'm just specializing with sensitive people and empaths. And so, I really helped them, like we talked about earlier, to manage the challenges and figure out how to master your energy and have a little bit more control over what comes in and goes out. And once people do that, it clears a lot of space for them to start looking at like, what are those parts of myself that I've compartmentalized because of what I've been told in my life, and how can I reclaim those? And then within that, like, how can I see what my true gifts are, especially as a sensitive person, because there's so many amazing qualities that we have. And, usually the people that are attracted to me, they have, for lack of a less cliche term, it's like the music's still inside of them. They want to write a book, or they want to be a coach themselves, or they, want to put their music out into the world. And through this process, it allows them to have the confidence and have the grounded strength to be able to start to put that stuff out there, which then has this really amazing ripple effect. And so I really would love to see a world where sensitivity was seen as a gift, just like somebody who's good at sports or somebody who's great at math, or, I really feel like it's a very unique talent. And if it was fostered from a young age, imagine what a different world we could have if that was, and if it was valued in society, in the workplace. And so by client, I'm hoping to put that ripple effect out into the world and let these people shine and share their healing magic with the rest of the world. So you can find me on my website. It's just amberrochelle.com. And then any social media, my handle is always at Miss Amber Rochelle, MS. I did that before I was married. It just stuck. So at Miss Amber Rochelle. And yeah, if anybody has any questions or anything, I love to hear from people and talk about this stuff. So definitely reach out to me.
You just met Amber Rochelle. You can find out more about her at her website at amberrochelle.com. Believing in something unseen is hard to do, but we do it every day. We believe in energy, wishes, hopes, and dreams. We believe in the goodness of others, and that everything somehow will be alright. If it is so easy to believe in those things, then why not fairies or elves? This has been a series of witches.